We have another week of hot takes. Let's not waste any time. What did you guys have to say this week? First hot take of the week is your TV and equipment actually make a huge difference on your skill. I was stuck in silver and gold across the classes until I went from a 46-inch to a 65-inch TV, and I jumped to gold and platinum. I got a PS5 and 120 Hz / 144 Hz play setting on my TV, and I went to plat / diamond. This is all in a 6-month time period. I've only played the game for a year though, so maybe it was just time. But the noticeable changes were instant with the hardware upgrades. Okay, this is a very good example of correlation versus causation. It can be correlated, but like it's definitely not causation where switching your TV instantly created the outcome of you getting better. I would say, yes, your equipment does matter, but like very minorly, but it improves your perception and it improves like the feel of the game. Having everything flow a bit better with higher refresh rates, having a bigger TV, your experience got better. It may have psychologically made you play better too. So they could be related, but it was probably about time. But you know, I partially agree. So it's not like a hot take, but you know, I can see where you're coming from. Ooh, this one's good. This hot take is I think the old Cassidy Hinder grenade was fine. It gave him and other people on his team some protection against being dove while still having room for error and short enough duration time to not always be crippling. I understand why it became a meme because of its inconsistency and how it would comically chase people around, but I think it would have been better to keep iterating on its old version than to revert to this inferior version of flashbang. Okay, so I do think this is certainly a hot take. Let's actually unpack it from end to end here. You think old Cask Hinder grenade was fine? That's fine, that's your opinion. You like the old one better. I have nothing against that. You wrote, it gave him and other people on his team some protection against being dove. I would argue that the new grenade does the same thing. In fact, it does it a little bit better because it pops quicker. So you can be a bit more reactive with it instead of it coming in, and if I like throw it, it has to like have that homing time before it like finally attaches to them, and then it'll activate on a single target. In fact, the new one is AoE. So if a Tracer and a Winston come at the exact same time, I can actually like poof, like a smoke of magic, and then poof, both of them get hindered at the same time. While you say room for error, I feel like it's actually easier on the new one simply because it's more consistent across the board. There's no RNG element. Now you wrote the part where it says, I understand the meme because of its inconsistency, how it would comically chase people around. It's not just a meme. I actually think it was just very frustrating to be on the receiving end where like it just would, where like they weren't really aiming at you, but it still followed you. That little bit of RNG and that it just didn't feel good for the receiving end. And on the, you know, the Cassidy's end, were you really that skilled, or did you just happen to throw it in their general area and it applied it when they actually got into cover? Now, you said, I think it would have been better to keep iterating on its old version than to revert to its inferior version of flashbang. They've iterated like 4 times on Mega Grenade. First iteration was changing the old flashbang to it, right? But then they had to iterate because the first version did 131 damage when everyone had 200 HP at the time. Then they, you know, cut the damage down, and then they made the range so you can lob it across. And they're like, you know what? People still complain about the RNG element. Go back to the old version. I wouldn't say it's inferior, but it's still kind of iterated off the old version because it's still a hinder. It has a slow, and it's a duration versus the old Cassidy grenade, which was a hard stun. So it's technically iterated, but like taking back elements of its consistency from before. I think the new Cassidy grenade, for me, is much better, much more consistent, and easier to play around on both ends. Hot take, Hanzo is actually not a luck-based hero. You may get the occasional headshot you don't mean to hit, but that doesn't mean Hanzo doesn't require aim. It's not a hot take. I think most people who say Hanzo is a luck-based hero is just being facetious and, you know, hyperbolizing the hero, as they do with many other heroes in the game. You know, Widow is no skill, so skillless when somebody gets killed by a Widow because like they just get a free one shot. You know what I mean? But I agree, some Hanzos will get a little lucky with a headshot like you said, but it does require some skill to be consistent at it and consistently pop off, take the right angles, get your arcs perfectly aligned based on the distance and know how high you have to aim and stuff. So not a hot take. Hot take, definitely not a suggestion because we know this is arguable for everyone, but this hero. Okay, Cloud says, in order to make Rhine viable for Overwatch 2, and help him catch up to all the heroes changes and maps that have come out, Rhine should be allowed no cooldown for his fire strikes. It changes nothing about his kit, gives him more consistent range capability, and why is swinging his hammer hard enough that it throws fire through the air on a cooldown that equates to Rein's bullet gauge. Rein has endured enough from Overwatch 1 to Overwatch 2 that his muscles can handle throwing those strikes. Now all of you non-Rein mains can explain why this is a hot take. I believe that this is a pretty hot take because that turns him into like this hybrid of not only being a brawl hero, but like he's just a long range, more effective than Sigma poking here. If I can just sit here and spam fire strikes for 120 damage this whole time, walk up, it just gives him too much. At that point, it's a little insane if you ask me. I think the heroes that can do all three roles end up being like very strong in the game, kind of like why Orisa was so good for so long, because Orisa sits there and has a strong poke capability, but then has that button to spin in and fully engage onto your face, and that made Orisa very good until they like tweaked all the numbers to the point where she's actually ends up being squishy because the cooldown rotation of all her tanky abilities don't line up anymore, but that's not the case. In any case, Rein has a pretty strong shield, and his biggest weakness was obviously closing the gap, and if he does close the gap, is he rewarded with, you know, converting something if he does close the gap on you? So, you know, before he saw his hot take, Alec Dawson did say in the interview with Spylo the other day that they are going to make Rein's charge do 300 damage now instead of, 225, which allows him to burst people, almost all the heroes in the game, if he lands a pin on you, and I think that's okay. So it gives him more reason to actually go in instead of just being a shield bot. So that's one good direction that they're taking him. The Fire Strike stuff just seems a little too insane to be able to be like a dynamic, strong poking hero, catch people and do that. Then he does too much. He's very strong at range, and he's going to be very strong at close range. He does need to have a little bit of a distinct weakness, if you ask me. And doing that would just minimize a weakness and make him too much of a generalist, and it would be a Rein meta, which isn't a bad thing for the Rein mains, but let's think about the bigger picture for all the other players here. Next hot take: meta checks often fail as metas are discovered, not manufactured. Meta checks either do nothing, like Reaper during GOATs, inadvertently makes the comp it's trying to stop even better, like Symmetra during Double Shield, or it does so well the game warps around it, like Brig during Dive. Heroes should introduce new playstyles and not exist to put the current meta in check. So I was a little confused at what you meant when I was reading this take, but you mean heroes, when they add or tune a hero to stop a meta, will often fail because it ends up, you know, doing nothing, like you said. So people discovered, okay, maybe we should do Reaper to kind of stop this GOATs meta, but it didn't do anything. Or they would try to play Symmetra to stop Double Shield, but then it ended up being even better and being the new meta. Or it does so well, like Dive meta was so strong in 2017 that they added Brig to counter Dive in 2018, and it just kind of like warped the game. I mean, heroes should always introduce new playstyles. I think that's a given. And I think Brig was the only example here that I can even think of, the one you listed, that they added specifically to stop, like to check the meta at the time, which was Dive. All the other cases were just people iterating off of it. And you say they often fail, but is it really failing? Because metas are always evolving and discovered. So they iterated with Reaper to see if it would work in some high level comps. It didn't, and that's fine. You know, inadvertently adding Symmetra into Double Shield back in 2018 was just like an iteration to see what could work to help play against it. Ended up being pretty strong or whatever, but that's fine because it's not really like a meta check. It's more of a, we've evolved the meta to keep, you know, this person did this, we got to keep evolving and advancing our strategy. The meta check you're talking about is just new heroes to introduce new playstyles, which I feel like they're trying to do. Malgo is very different than Alari and very different from Lifeweaver, and none of these were really meta checks, once again, except Brig, if I'm not mistaken. So unless I'm misunderstanding this hot take, I don't really know what you're going for with this. I'm gonna be real with you. Hot take: the people who like or don't mind Counterwatch are DPS and support players. Most DPS and support players can get away with only learning 1 or 2 backup characters if their main doesn't match up well against enemy comps, whereas tanks need to learn at least 3 or 4 other characters to survive. If the other roles felt like they're forced to swap every game they play or throw like tanks do, they'd probably hate counter swapping in 2 days. I can sort of see where you're going with this, and one of the reasons I think that a lot of DPS and support players don't mind or don't care about Counterwatch so much is because a lot of the DPS and support heroes are generalists and they slot everywhere. Like a Tracer or a Sojourn or Cass can work in a lot of compositions. Same with a hero like Kiriko or Lucio and Ana, they just slot into so many comps. But a tank can only do so much, and because they kind of define the archetype of the team comp you're playing from. If you're playing Winston, you're probably you have to play the dive style. There's nothing else you can do. But if I'm a Kiriko, I can play with a Winston and play divey, or I can play slow with the Junker Queen and play brawly as a Kiriko, you know what I mean? So there's two different playstyles I can adapt to. But I agree, like countering for tanks is a lot more miserable because there is only one. I'm not sure how to solve this without going into the whole 6v6 debacle, because I'm sure we can still tackle this and make them feel meaningful and playmaky. And I think Alec Dawson in the recent interview says one of the things they're going to try is giving tanks the option, or every hero the option to opt into an extra passive, or if you play TFT, like extra augments, and ways to kind of adapt to the playstyle without having to go backwards to 6v6. And I'm not going to get into the whole argument, like I said, simply because there's just not enough tank players. The queue times are miserable despite the players. And I'll talk one piece where they say if we just kept iterating off 6v6, tanks would be playable and things would be good again. Tanks are not going to be popular no matter what. No matter what role, I think some WoW designer said tanks are just the least popular role in any game no matter what. Hard to appeal to them. I'm not saying 66 wasn't fun. I did enjoy it back then, but I think we need to be realistic with a lot of things. I did enjoy it, and I also enjoy 5v5, and I'm still down to iterate on this to make tanks fun. And I do play a lot of tank in quick play. Quick play is not the same as comp. It's true, you probably do need to learn like 3 characters on tank. Having one of each of the archetypes of dive, brawl, and poke are pretty good. That's why I play Sigma for my poke. I play Doom or Diva now for my dive, and I play Junker Queen for my brawl, and that covers most of my bases. So I'm not having a terrible time playing tank so far, but I'm not a tank player by nature, and I don't spam comp with it. But I sort of agree with your hot take back at the beginning with, you know, the counter watch with DPS and support players. We don't really talk about it as much because we are a little privileged with being able to be generalists. Hot take, the only reason Lucio has completely dominated top play for so long is that Blizzard hasn't given him any competition. I promise if they add another low healing support that provides a speed boost, it would give Lucio a serious run for his money, or it could offer different playstyles altogether where you just ditch the heals and run double speed, maybe with Wrecking Ball or something. Not a hot take at all. I completely agree with you, and luckily for you, Space Ranger has speed. Alec Dawson said it himself in his recent AMA, literally on Wednesday, June 26th. And maybe they do run double speed, but one thing to remember is speed boost in Overwatch has diminishing returns, or not diminishing returns, it has a hard cap. I believe it's at 70 or 75%. Once you're there, you can't go any faster. So if you do stack like Junker Queen Shout with like Lucio's speed amp, you go above, you hit the threshold, max threshold, and if you run double speed, if you're cycling them correctly, it could still work, but if you stack them all, you kind of lose value there. So that's something people will have to cook. When this new Space Ranger hero comes out, maybe we run triple speed like that. Maybe not. I'm excited to see come season 12. Hot take, Ramatra is the most versatile tank in the game. Of course, he shines in a brawl playstyle due to his punch move and ultimate, but if you can aim his primary fire at long distances, you can poke very, very well and do tons of headshot damage. He doesn't have any dive capabilities, but he can assist diving DPS by throwing out his vortex to prevent the enemy from escaping. Oh, and he has a shield. I would say he's one of the most versatile. It's a bit arguable on what you define as being versatile, but like there's a couple of tanks that can do a few roles, Ramatra being one of them, poking with your staff. It can do a lot of damage, but the poke is not the strongest point. It's purposely like pretty weak compared to his brawl. I would still identify him as more of a brawl tank because that's where the bulk of his value comes from. He gets so tanky, has a huge block, huge punch burst damage. Another hero you can argue for multiple roles is Orisa. You poke better than Ramatra, and then you would argue Orisa's all-in in your face is stronger than Ramatra's as well. The only downside is Orisa doesn't have a shield. Ramatra does. Both are pretty versatile in those ways. The argument of whether being versatile means better for tank is debatable, because if you can be versatile, so like a jack of all trades but a master of none, versus just being really, really good at one thing. Like Malcolm's just really, really good at being brawl, and that can be just enough if you build your entire team around that one single identity, the full brawl in your face. Or if you go just full dive, Winston's very, very good at, dive, but not good at poking, or, he can poke a little bit with the secondary fire, but like his major core is diving. Make him really, really good there. You build a whole team around that and find success there, versus just trying to do a little bit of everything, at a mediocre level, which isn't conducive to wins. Hot take, in a game like Overwatch where hero swapping is allowed, hero swapping should not just be allowed, but encouraged. It's a fun mechanic that you don't really see in other games and adds a unique flavor to Overwatch. Ult charge should be retained on swap. I don't think this is a hot take. I think this is what sets Overwatch apart from Valorant or Apex or other shooters where you have active hero switching. That is what Jeff Kaplan and the original design of Overwatch was encouraging, hero swapping. I guess it's just tough for people where like one single swap can completely change your perception and your perceived feel of the game. Balance is not just about raw numbers. Countering could just be a very minor thing like 55-45 advantage disadvantage, which isn't the end of the world, but for the receiving end of being countered, people just think it's the end of the world. And I'm not trying to dismiss their feelings, but the psychology and the perception of how you play does matter to both the balance team and how you feel about the game, and that is important to them. So, I mean, I don't think it's a hot take because I agree with you. I do think it adds a unique flavor to Overwatch. The all charge retaining on swap is something they have right now. It used to be 25%, it's down to 15%. I'd argue you can get rid of it now to maybe disincentivize it because you can still have the choice to swap. You just don't get punished for it as hard right now with the alt charge retention. And not everybody does play multiple heroes, so I think they can go back to having it at 0% and still be fine with the game. It may help with the hero swapping feel or issue, quote unquote, and we go from there. Hot take: the new competitive system is arguably worse than the last one. Overwatch 2 versus Overwatch 1, right? Because the current Overwatch 2 one, this is exactly how it was, minus a few tweaks under the hood. They just show you now the modifiers that go on in their algorithm, which has confused players. But on the same vein, people have asked for more transparency because they're confused on how it worked. So this is their way of, showing you, like, if you win when you're at a lower probability to win, 47-53, you get a reversal or uphill battle. That's the whole point of it. But this has always existed. And there's a misconception where people say, oh my God, why did they add this pressure modifier or this modifier? I mean, a lot of these things were already part of the matchmaking system and probably were very similar in Overwatch 1 in a lot of ways. They just kind of like adjusted it in with the whole like the cards and all the other stuff. I'm not saying the system's perfect. I have my issues with it as well. And I think I do prefer the old SR system, but that in itself was a little confusing for some because there is a hidden MMR and then your SR, and then some people would gain 25 for a win, and then they'd lose 32, and then that would be like, why did that happen? Or when you're in a new season, why'd they gain plus 40 but then lose minus 60? SR in Overwatch 1. There was confusion back then as well. People often overlook that. And I think this one could still be iterated on, but they're a little bit more transparent and they've alleviated some of the pressure. More people are hitting champion. The lower end bronzes have the pressure relief now to make it not as bad on each of the extreme ends. The reset I feel like just confused people more so than it being worse. And the confusion is the perception of making it worse versus it objectively being worse. I don't know where I'm rambling with this, but that's just my take on it. Hot take: the matchmaking is more likely to match you with other solo queuers, and solo queuers are harder to work with. I mean, yeah, if you're solo, it's gonna likely match you with other solo players, and solo queue players are always gonna be harder than people who are duoed or have a friend that they're playing with or a group that is probably a bit more in sync because they're grouped up. I don't think this is a hot take. This is kind of like a hot take: those that say Elo Hell exists need to take a statistics course. I think this is a chirp on how I presented Elo Hell last week. I apologize a little bit because I sounded a little snobby. I kind of responded to some comments last week on the take a stats course because people didn't. I was kind of going off on people complaining about Elo Hell for like the 50th time that I've always seen, and I'm just. The point I didn't make last week is that I don't really believe in Elo Hell in the way of in statistics, in the logical form. I can understand, I'm not dismissing how people feel, and it can feel like hell where you feel like you're playing correctly and you're doing the things you need to do, but you can't account for all the variables and factors that go on in your game and that are inconsistent with the thrower and the lever and the people not using their ability, or you're doing the right play, but your teammates are not doing the right play. I guess my argument was that despite that, the law of averages and stats across many samples, 500, 1,000 games, if you remove all those shitty things that happened with like the people not making the correct play, it should average out with the law of averages and regress back to the mean of you winning more than you losing, as long as you are playing at or above your skill level. Or actually, I would argue not playing above it, your performance against them. Because there's another argument someone said that I kind of agree with, where a lot of these team-based skill systems are not really representative of your skill, because you may have the skill of a higher level player. If you're a gold player, you're making the diamond level skill play of this correct play that a diamond plus player would make, but you're not rewarded for it because your team didn't respond to it correctly. So then I can't argue that it's a skill thing. It's just a measurement of your performance, and that's what it rewards. So it's up to you to adapt and be like, if I'm making this play, even though it's correct, quote unquote, and diamond GM players would do this play, but my gold players don't understand and don't do it. It's up to you to adapt and realize, hey, if I didn't ping it and I didn't communicate to my team this correct play and they're not in voice chat, how would they know? They're also just gold players. So the argument is the adaptation is part of skill and will help you get out of elo hell as well, and part of your performance. But anyways, that's it for this week's hot takes. Leave some more in the comments. See you next week.